Hi, my name is Jared Bielby. I'm a graduate of the Humanities Computing and Library of Information Studies combined program at the University of Alberta. I'm currently employed at the Edmonton Public Library and have been there for the last 12 years. I'm the guest editor of the International Review of Information Ethics, Volume 22 for the year 2015 on global citizenship, as well as an active member of the International Centre for Information Ethics. My research is in the current and future directions of information ethics and its crossroads with library ethics. As well as that, I'm exploring the crossroads of information ethics with WikiLeaks and whistleblowing, with a specific emphasis on the ethical and philosophical implications of information culture pertaining to civil rights and social action. In addition, I'm currently exploring alongside members of the International Centre for Information Ethics the philosophical and theoretical possibilities of global citizenship in a digital era towards a specific address of the concept of the netizen. My talk today explores the ethical foundations for WikiLeaks in a post-WikiLeaks society through the established praxis of the field of information ethics, where a theoretical framework for an understanding of the roots of WikiLeaks finds its origins in the cultural dialectics of history. As such, my argument is that A, the WikiLeaks phenomenon is the inevitable, conclusive, and symbolic manifestation of the ebb and flow of the life of information, whose roots are established in library ethics throughout history. And B, that collaborative knowledge commons as a contemporary information anti-establishment, including WikiLeaks, are set to become the next global information monopoly. And C, that the WikiLeaks media phenomenon, being the mass release of millions of unedited and unaccounted for documents into the public sphere, unlooses an information saturation singularity, whereby a lack of accountability to information dissolution enables information entropy, an occurrence that demands an existential accountability to each citizen to the state of information. What is the ethical role of WikiLeaks? I first asked myself this question more than 2 years ago, aware that many were asking the same question. The mission of WikiLeaks is to throw open the shutters of information monopoly, allowing free flow of information into the public sphere. Does WikiLeaks account for an ethics within its mission parameters? As the name suggests, WikiLeaks was originally partially founded on a wiki publication model, a model that allowed for non-moderated and anonymous submission of otherwise inaccessible documents. While WikiLeaks discontinued the wiki model in 2010, replacing it instead with a traditional publication model, thus closing volunteer edits and submissions, WikiLeaks and its whistleblowers continued to process millions of classified documents under censored conditions. The question must be posed, do such censored conditions find WikiLeaks abdicating on their founding objective to provide unmediated access to information? The move from an open wiki model to a control model in itself embraces numerous implications indicative of a wider philosophical inquiry. WikiLeaks encompasses a larger phenomenon, a paradigm that symbolizes the nature of the ebb and flow of knowledge, access, and control, exemplifying a seeming phenomenon whereby all information, however initially equally accessible to all citizens of a shared world, eventually becomes monopolized, restricted, censored, and controlled. On a macrocosmic level, the WikiLeaks saga has, since its inception, opened the door to an unprecedented philosophical and ethical quagmire regarding the nature of information and information control. Whereas on a microcosmic level, a critical assessment of WikiLeaks, its mission, and its history reveals a seemingly contradictory or even non-existent ethic in regards to how its administrators handle their mission, insisting on transparency yet concealing a tale of internal dissonance and deceit. To define an ethics for WikiLeaks, I first had to come to terms with the cultural dialectics of what can be captured under the rubric of collaborative knowledge, embracing everything from WikiLeaks, Wikipedia, and open source to copyleft, crowdsource, and social media, as well as ideas of knowledge commons, creative commons, and collective intelligence, among others. I argue that the collaborative knowledge models are the contemporary face of information dissemination and control, a product of cultural dialectics that first attempts to free information, only to monopolize it again in the end, a pattern not exclusive to the digital age. Opinion on the actions of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks is diverse, not only between government and citizen, but also between the scholars of the field of information ethics. Hotman calls WikiLeaks activities an abomination, explicitly asserting that offering the world a treasure trove of unvetted prescribed documents embarrasses, harms, and kills. On the other hand, Edward Spence, writing in the International Review of Information Ethics, unequivocally states that according to the national and international journalism codes of ethics, Julian Assange, in his assumed role as a social journalist, has committed no wrong. It is the above spectrum of not only disagreement but also vast dissimilarity in approach between information ethicists that through the lack of a common methodology, such differences arise, whereby the very vice that ethics so vehemently tries to avoid resurfaces in light of WikiLeaks, namely the uncritical application of assumed morals. A theoretical foundation for an ethics for WikiLeaks must be introduced in order to explore the cultural dialectics, debate, and implications of the WikiLeaks phenomenon. WikiLeaks is not simply another cog in the wheel of the history of information ethics, nor simply a manifestation of media culture and media ethics, but rather it is the inevitable manifestation and fulfillment of the same cultural dialectics behind library ethics, as chronicled throughout history from ideas of parrhesia in ancient Greece to the history and ethics of medieval Islamic libraries, to ideas of access to private libraries arising from the French Revolution, and finally to the encapsulation of library ethics in the professionalism as established by the ALA in the 19th century. Thus, library ethics, information ethics, and an ethics for WikiLeaks find their origins in the agora of Athenian democracy through parrhesia, a type of freedom of speech that equates the authenticity of the ethic by paralleling it to the level of vulnerability of the speaker. Looking at Flaherty's information ecology, Capero's theory of message, and Samek's dialectic of intellectual freedom and social responsibility, the concluding task of my thesis was to outline a heritage of WikiLeaks and to thus establish an ethics for WikiLeaks as founded in traditional library ethics, where WikiLeaks is a reflection of library ethics, libraries ideally being a mirrored reflection of society itself, both past and present, and WikiLeaks the inevitable conclusion to the choices of each individual in our information society rather than merely the choice of a handful of dissidents who expose government information. One philosopher dominates the field of inquiry into the WikiLeaks phenomenon thus far, intellectual pop star Slavoj Žižek. And while Žižek himself might not advocate for any kind of ethics, it is all the same that through Žižek one can begin to form and propose a primary research question towards an ethics for WikiLeaks, as well as a potential direction towards the exploration of the ethical concerns of information saturation and dissolution. While information ethics provides us with the necessary framework, it is Žižek who provides the material for an ethics for WikiLeaks. From Žižek, I posit that it is through an existential accountability to information as digital citizens, or lack of accountability, that determines the state of information entropy. Žižek speaks of our unbearable freedom. He reminds us that the trauma of being informed is not in the discovery of some abstract puppeteer secretly and deceitfully pulling the strings of our destiny, but rather in our confrontation with the fundamental unconscious choice by means of which every one of us has to choose her or his existential project, quote unquote. In other words, it is not the puppeteer we fear, but rather the freedom that comes with the choice we must make free from the puppeteer strings. S.M. Reed Henry points out in his article on Žižek on WikiLeaks that the perceived recompenses of WikiLeaks have failed us, namely in that the shame of our own apathy has been all the more exposed in the silence following our supposed outrage over the NSA surveillance revelations. Žižek says the only surprising thing about the WikiLeaks revelations is that they contain no surprises. Didn't we learn exactly what we expected to learn? The real disturbance was on the level of appearances. We can no longer pretend we don't know what everyone knows we know. Picking up from Flaherty, the right to ignore no longer exists. Capurro articulates that it is the worldview of the digital that embraces the dimensions of our being in the world. He explicates ideas of cultural alienation within societies because of the consequences of information technology on individuals and society. The implications of cultural alienation within an information-saturated society must be addressed alongside notions of accountability to self and other, explicating the dimensions of being in the world, as per Capurro's Heideggerian ontology. Flaherty speaks of the dialectic of reflection, that the human mind must constantly give meaning to its surrounding environment to escape meaninglessness, nothingness, chaos, because these threaten to tear the self asunder, to drown it in alienating otherness. This primordial dread of annihilation urges the self to go on fulfilling any semantically empty space with whatever meaning the self can muster. The concerns of collaborative knowledge ethics and WikiLeaks studies are not just with matters of privacy, intellectual freedom, access to information, anonymity, transparency, and intellectual property, but also with negligence and accountability on the part of both government and individual to the state of information, whereby negligence towards both self and information encourages and allows for information dissolution. In the hands of what guardians or keepers does the information currently reside? Has information ceased to belong to authoritative power structures, becoming an uncomfortable abyssal blank slate that necessitates an existential accountability? If so, perhaps it is in light of this that collaborative knowledge societies, uncomfortable in such an abyss, offer no resistance to the return to information monopolies. Spence's argument for the Fifth Estate is telling in terms of the dissolution of information, whereby every citizen becomes a journalist. But what exactly is entailed in the Fifth Estate? What happens to information when every citizen is a journalist and all information is available en masse to be disseminated? If one posits that all citizens cannot disseminate all information, can the exposure of all information still inform? Can the phenomenon that we are looking at, as established by the Fifth Estate, bring about the state of information dissolution? The use and understanding of the concept of entropy in information ethics becomes convoluted, best illustrated in the various debates between Capurro and Flaherty on the matter. Flaherty understands entropy as a metaphysical term that means non-being or nothingness. Flaherty's entropy as metaphysical entropy is increased when being, interpreted informationally, is annihilated or degraded. Capurro, in turn, notes that Flaherty believes he discovered the notion of information and its relation to form, and even the philosophy of information. Capurro states that with regard to entropy and some key metaphysical concepts such as non-being, the critical reader might remember that these are really not new issues, neither in science nor in philosophy. A common theme among information and computer scientists is the inevitable singularity of machine intelligence surpassing the intelligence of its creator. Is it conceivable to understand that singularity as being the point at which the sum of all information created surpasses the totality of our ability, as creators of said information, to reinterpret it and thus communicate it? Zizek, Capurro, and Flaherty set the stage. Upon each revelation of WikiLeaks, the obligatory outcry by citizens to whom it concerns is sounded. The expected noise is declared and broadcasted by the media, but the citizen, upon manufacturing the obligatory clatter, then returns to the comfort zone of complacency, as though such slacktivism is good enough to appease one's sense of accountability to the state of government, to the state of privacy, to the state of secrecy, and to the state of their own self. After all, what can one really do? Zizek concludes by noting that, through actions like the WikiLeaks disclosures, our shame for tolerating such power over us is made more shameful by being publicized. Ultimately, the abuses of power are a reflection of what the citizen chooses, at least in a democratic society, and existentially speaking, it might be posited that the act of choice, that of ignoring, and the consequences thereof, is ultimately what the citizen wants. Are the short-lived reactions of the citizens and their noise merely a straw man set up to redirect one's guilt from the vices of complacency? If the citizen were truly engaged with what they know, they would not lay down their ballot after casting it, but would take it up daily. They would make good on themselves as democratic citizens. As Zizek points out, our outrage over the government surveillance revelations should not be about the danger of government monitoring our information, but rather the opposite, that of the government, of WikiLeaks, of any institution not knowing the very information that it monopolizes for the sheer magnitude of that information. If the institution, whether it be an institution of government, peer-reviewed journal, or collaborative knowledge forum, is not capable, as an elitist faction limited in number, of being accountable to the vast amounts of information available through information and communication technologies, and yet they hold exclusive rights to it, monopolizing it to the disadvantage of both themselves and society, then it becomes incumbent upon society to ask why such a scenario is allowed. It is only as a collective of existentially founded beings that we have the capacity to face information dissolution and to account for it. As exemplified in the recent Heartbleed scenario and the hesitancy to reveal it, our fears are not unfounded conspiracies, and the state of information in the world is more vulnerable to theft, attack, misuse, and dissolution than it has ever been throughout human history. Heartbleed was only a wake-up call. It is unacceptable that as global citizens we allow the state of information, personal or otherwise, to sit unaccounted for and unguided in the hands of negligent guardians. The main platform that WikiLeaks and information dissolution come together on is in the uncritical release of tens of thousands of classified documents into the public domain by WikiLeaks, an act that harbors harsh criticism even from other journalists who point out that such a lack of editorial discretion bypasses the necessary analysis of responsible journalism. A very valid critique, it is the complete lack of analysis, not so much on the part of WikiLeaks, but rather the citizen, that abdicates accountability for the content and influence of information exposed, including the inevitable lack of influence of said documents on those to whom it concerns, namely the free citizen who, having not taken accountability for the state of information previous to its exposure through the efforts of whistleblowers, continues to deny that accountability in the face of it. It is not the government that WikiLeaks has blown the whistle on, but rather the citizen. The greatest mistake that has been made in regards to WikiLeaks is the polarization of its players, whereby either lionizing or demonizing Assange and his fellow whistleblowers, either putting them on a pedestal or casting them as dissidents, we have both misrepresented their journey and abdicated on our own responsibilities in regards to what WikiLeaks is and how it has come into being as the very representation or manifestation of our collective apathy to the state of information and information flow.